The New Level Cap podcast is a show about fun, friends, game design, and all things otherwise. Your hosts are Marco DeSantos and Brad Telton of Level 99 Games. I'm Chris Solis, your producer, and without further ado, please enjoy the show.
Yes, my wondrous fans, welcome to the Black Parade. When I was a young boy, my father told me to listen to the New Level Cap podcast. As usual, it's me, your host, Marco DeSantos, also known as Mechanic Critic and not the writer of Umbrella Academy, and with me is my amazing co-host, God King of Level 99 Games himself.
This intro is probably the weirdest one yet. What is the Black Parade?
Okay, so maybe you're a bit too old, because in my generation, when I was like a teen, like My Chemical Romance was really popular, and like they have this one song called The Black Parade that starts off like, when I was a young boy, my father, and stuff like that. Like,
okay, yeah, I think I was more in that like Linkin Park era, so I might have missed that one.
I see. But don't worry about it. It's just like, it's like the emo anthem. People call it the emo anthem.
that was Millennium, or not that, Linkin Park was the emo anthem for my era, which is right around the Millennium 2000s.
Yeah, so there you go, My Chemical Romance, and it relates to Umbrella Academy because Gerard Way, the front man for My Chemical Romance, wrote Umbrella Academy. So there you go.
Interesting. I read the comics, and I really enjoyed the Umbrella Academy comic. I didn't get into the Netflix show. I guess maybe it's a little too slow to start for me.
I see. Because you know everything already, Brad.
I also already know the plot, and it's very much a show that's about the twist, right?
Yeah.
Because it's kind of a mystery.
Let's not spoil anything for the fans.
Sure, it's good. It's worth reading the comics. I can't speak to the show, but it's worth reading the comics.
Yeah, don't say you like the anime if you haven't read the manga first.
Sure, that works.
That works.
Well, welcome everybody. It's good to be back for another Level of Cap podcast. I am Brad Talton, with me, Marco DeSantos, and we are here today to talk about replayability in games.
Woohoo! Unlike TV shows, which have no replayability, if you really think about it.
Except Bandersnatch.
I guess, because Bandersnatch is a choose-your-own-adventure book, so I guess that makes sense. Yeah, okay.
But anyway, this is a topic that's very near and dear to our hearts at Level 99 Games. We spend a lot of time thinking about replayability and how we're going to keep our games fresh and replayable for multiple runs.
Yep.
So yeah. Well,
Brad.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, what is replayability? At least to you. I have my own definition, but maybe you have a different one.
Okay, so to me, I feel like the game really exists in the space between learning the game and mastering the game. And so the journey that we take to get from learning to mastery is the game experience. Now, as the game setups change, as we kind of understand the systems below the gameplay and learn sort of the underlying rules of this universe, that's where we really experience fully the gameplay. It's when you are learning something new when you play a game. To me, that's what replayability is. If I play a game and I don't learn anything new, then I'm ready to put it away. It's not the replayability is lost. And so if the game setup generates a situation where I have to learn something new or try something new or experiment, then to me, that's the replayability.
That sounds really interesting. Yeah, so in games like BattleCon or maybe chess, right? There's a difference between knowing how to play chess and being actually good at chess, or being good at BattleCon and learning BattleCon to begin with. So
like when I play a game of BattleCon, I'm probably playing a match that I personally have either never played before or have only played once or twice. And so to really so I have to learn that match as I'm playing. I have to discover the weaknesses and strengths of each fighter's kit and play through that. So there are a lot of different setups to the game, and each of those setups requires its own mastery. So we would say that's kind of on the extreme end of replayability, because it gives you a lot of ways to pursue mastery of the game over multiple games.
Ooh, I think I like that definition. I think my definition kind of fits yours a little bit, but is less technical. It's more on a feel side, you know? Mm-hmm. Essentially, replayability is like, basically, how many times can I play this game while being entertained and being engaged? Because I think the ultimate point here is that even if you have technically limitless replayability by changing setups or changing the character you're playing, if you have 20 characters, but they all basically play the same, or they all are the same except for one stat difference in one number or whatever, then it's not really replayable anymore. You cease to engage, right?
Yeah, like playing all the different characters in Mario Kart doesn't really make for a truly unique experience each time. But playing all the characters in Smash Brothers is a pretty unique experience, except for a couple of the Echo Fighters, right?
Yeah,
But
and even then, sometimes the Echo Fighters play differently from the other fighter.
they have a different adventure mode, at least.
Yeah,
Or
they have
different
a
classic
adventure.
mode.
Exactly. So in that sense, right, it's kind of a mix of both, right? On one end, you can have that difference between learning and mastery, but the big deal, in my opinion, is that even if there is that gap, if the player starts feeling like they can no longer master the game, even if they technically can still do it, then I feel like you've still lost the replayability in that sense. Like if
Well, I think
players
that's the point, right? Like if I play a game and I don't need to learn anything else, or it's not worth it to learn anything else, either of those two cases, then the game is over, right?
Yeah.
So it's how much distance can we put between full mastery and learning the game, and also keep that space interesting for the player.
Yeah, I think that's important, right? It's not just about the gap of mastery and learning, it's also about keeping the player engaged through the entire process. Because the moment you falter in one of those two things, the game's done, right?
Yeah. But for me, I truly believe that as long as I am learning something new, I'm learning new tricks for the game, then that will remain interesting. So it's really like if I reach this point where it becomes a pure skill wall, or mostly if it becomes a pure skill wall to achieve mastery, is when I drop out of a game. I really want to be discovering new strategies. For me, I think some people, well, in sports, it is a pure skill wall, right? Like you just get good, and then by practice. So that can be engaging for a certain type of person. And I think, for example, like your fighting games like Street Fighter are engaging on that level, where there is a skill wall and you do practice until you're excellent and you overcome that. For me, I don't really like execution or skill, those kind of skill walls. I'm really more interested in the strategic skill walls. And so when I build my games, that's more what I play towards.
I generally feel the same way about that. I do like some sort of execution wall, but it's a bit different in that my execution wall love is how can I get by with the least amount of execution possible? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, everybody wants to. Nobody likes execution walls, but there is something satisfying in overcoming them.
Yeah, or cheating them, right?
Yeah, or finding a way around.
Yeah. So, Brad, let's talk about... So we're talking about replayability. What are some techniques that our listeners as game designers, or at least as players, can look out for when a game wants to have more replayability?
Probably the easiest way to make replayability in your game is to have different setups. You know, if you have variable factions, like we're talking about the characters in Smash Brothers, or tracks in a racing game, or if we have, especially if we can remix our current content, like each time you start a roguelike, you're in the dungeon is a bit different. Maybe you have a different item, or even if you have different characters that you can play as, like in BattleCon or Exceed, those provide a lot of different content. So having different ways to set up the game, and then we play out the same game but with a different setup, that'll create different values for the resources that we have, for the different actions we can take, and it'll force us probably to use some of the random techniques or tools that we're given in a different way. Argent is a great example for this. There's so much variable setup in Argent. Sometimes gold is the most valuable resource, sometimes mana is the most valuable resource, sometimes influence points can be especially scarce. And those games provide interesting challenges to players. If you play a game of Argent and the only way to get IP is to get into the infirmary, then that's a pretty unique game of Argent, right? Because everybody, as soon as somebody throws a fireball, they're giving away a large amount of control.
And it can be pretty drastic too, right? The amount of content that the variable setup changes can be as simple as, like, you have a different skill at the start. to as drastic as a game like maybe Argent or Millennium Blades, right? Millennium Blades, I think, is the biggest example, wherein in one game, this one card could be the best card in the entire set, and then in another game, it's complete trash and nobody wants it, right? It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and by that same token, the other thing that we can do, obviously, is we can diverge during the gameplay. So, as a game plays, the events are going to play out differently every time, and if a game has a high degree of variability, then we will discover new things as we play. So you take a game like Dominion, there's a lot of variable setups, but the game doesn't change. Once the game starts, you can pretty accurately predict what the top strategies are going to be. But on the other hand, like Millennium Blades, we can build a setup, but we have really no idea what our strategy is going to be until we start drawing cards, and then we see what we actually have to work with in this particular setup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the game can diverge quite a bit during play, even if you're using the same setup in a game like Millennium Blades with high variability. Yeah, you don't take away control from a player, but you do inject a lot of variety into the potential for the gameplay. So you force players to adapt.
Yeah, I think that's one deal that you have to do that changes variability in play or like differences during play. Is that even if the starting setup is the same, certain things have to change within play that make you change your strategy. If you can take the same course of actions 100% of the time and replicate your results 100% of the time, then most likely you do not have differences during play. And this could lower your replayability by a lot. Because even like for example, a game like Mario Kart, right? Like if you play the same track over and over again, it might seem like it'll be the same, but the differences in items that you get from the boxes changes how that game plays out, right? So certain things can happen, but it doesn't mean that you change the player's control scheme and make it so that going forward is actually left. Like, it's not like that, right? You just have to do things that make the players change the way they play or change the strategies they take.
You know, F-Zero for the GameCube actually did have a random track generator, and so you could play a random track circuit. Every course of the circuit you would have no idea what track is coming up. And that was a pretty incredible innovation in racing at that time when that game was out.
Wow.
But anyway, yeah. So at the point when you know the right move to make, when I'm like, I know this is the absolute right move, that's sort of when gameplay ends and computation takes over. When you've solved the game. So at some point in the game, you'll say, I think this is the right move. I believe this is the right move. I have a strong feeling that this is the correct move, but you don't know 100% for sure that your move is absolutely right. And when you do know 100% for sure a move is actually right, then you're just executing a series, the algorithm. You're not really playing the game.
Yeah, and that's not fun. At least it stops being as engaging as when you're trying to figure out what you should do, right? Mm-hmm. Which is usually the fun in most games. And I think here's the last point. It's not always just about what you do before the game. It's not always about what you do during the game. Sometimes it's what happens when you're done with the game. So replayability, this might seem like a weird concept for replayability, but post-game content can act as a sort of way to revive your interest in a game. Essentially making that game a little bit more replayable, not infinitely so, though. The
classic example would be like your New Game Plus, right? Where I'm encouraged to try the game again, maybe on a higher difficulty level, or with the potential to get a different ending, or to take different choice paths through the game. And so you get a very, I would say, like low cost replayability just by throwing a New Game Plus in. But a lot of games do this even better by adding, say, an expansion or a DLC, or things like that.
Yeah, I think the most iconic example for me was Pokemon Gold and Pokemon Silver. Because, like, when I finished the Elite Four in Pokemon Gold and Silver, I was like, alright, I'm done with the game. And then after the post-credits scene, they were like, oh, by the way, here's Kanto. Here's just the entire region of Kanto. Goes through the entire first Pokemon game. And I'm like, what? I lost my mind, because, yeah, that was really, really cool. I'm really sad they didn't do that for any of the other generations, but, like, it was really cool that you got to, like, go through all of the gym leaders from the first Pokemon game, and then you fought Red at the end of it. Oh, that was just so good. That was so cool.
Yeah, Pokemon has always been really good about having a lot of post-game content. You almost feel like the whole game is a tutorial leading up to the open world portion at the end.
Yeah, that's true. Where it's like you go online, you breed, you do like competitive battling, or you do beauty contests and all this stuff, right? It's
Yeah, and each of those cities with its own gym leader also has one of those mini games that's taught to you through the city you visit.
You're not wrong. Yeah, because one of them is like the beauty gym, and one of them is like, there's like this mini games you have to do. There's
and it's like you have to win this beauty competition to fight the gym leader, or you have to, do the like IV training before you can fight this guy. They teach you this stuff, and they force you to kind of learn all these subsystems. So really, I mean, the whole adventure is a tutorial in a certain sense, and I think a lot of the really classic replayable games are like that. They teach you something up to the very end, and then once they're done teaching you a thing, it's like, and now the world is yours.
Huh. I've never really considered it that way, but you're not wrong, right? Like maybe that's why people feel like Pokemon games are a bit hand-holdy throughout the entire thing. It's because they're meant to be. They are.
Yeah, they are. I had a really good experience playing Atelier Firis, one of the Atelier series games that I'm going through, and you go on this whole adventure across the world, and it takes like a year of in-game time. So you're literally like adventuring for a whole year to get to go on this long odyssey, and then you get to the town, you pass the alchemy licensing exam, and then the game starts. But I'm already like 30 hours in at this point. But it's like, because like I finished the whole game, I built all these great bombs, I beat the final boss and everything, and then they're like, oh, and now you can go out and explore, and there's all these monsters that are way harder than anything that I thought was like the final boss that I thought was the final boss. There's tons of plot lines that are open world type plot lines where you have to go around and explore places that you didn't explore on your first trip through the world. They finally give you all the convenient alchemy features, like there's a duplication service. And I got through the whole game, and I was like, where's the duplication service? This is something that's pretty standard in these games. And they don't give it to you until you pass the alchemy exam. But that's like 30 hours in, so you have to do a lot of synthesis and really master the system before they give you the convenient feature that lets you get out of doing a lot of synthesis.
Huh. That's really interesting. So you feel how many more hours do you have to play of Atelier Firis?
I don't know. Like I'm just going through the plots as they come up. But it's the final villain from the previous game just showed up, so I imagine that's where the end game is going, if I follow that thread.
I see. Okay, so time to beat the big final boss. And Brad, it's time to beat this first segment. We're going to go to the short break, and we're going to talk about more about the pitfalls and the advantages of adding replayability to your game, if there are even pitfalls or advantages. So Brad, take us to the break.
All right, cool. Let's go to the break.
Visit Level 99 Games at PAX East. We'll be featuring Street Fighter Exceed at the show. Come to Tabletop Booth 11 to learn how to play and leave with a free Ryu vs. Ken demo deck. See you there.
Cool. So, Marco, one of the things that's infinitely replayable is the format of this show, because now that we're back from the break, we are going to replay our usual what's the word I'm looking for? MO, as it were, and talk about the advantages and pitfalls of replayability.
Ooh, Brad, really? But don't forget that during play, there's a difference, because our topics are different every time. The variable setup is that we have different topics. So it's fine.
And that Marco will come up with a brand new genre of intro to reskin this game with.
You know what? One of these days I'm going to make like those CD noir intros. It'll be so good.
We need Level Cap podcast in space. Is what we need.
All right.
In space.
Replayability. The final frontier. Brad, what are some advantages of replayability?
Obviously, the core one is that players will play your game longer. And this allows you to maximize content by repeating content. And it sounds kind of, I guess, dirty to say repeating content. But when you have something like let's say a card or a monster or a dungeon that required a lot of time to build, players are not often going to get the full experience going through this once, right? Like you fight one zombie and then no more zombies show up. Well, that's not a very good zombie game. And we don't want to design every zombie in the game individually. So we're going to have players refight these enemies a couple of times. And so because we're going to have to reuse the content a couple of times, we can make the content more than players are going to see on one run or in one battle or in one use of the weapon or whatever, so that they get to really discover play. And this is where we get into kind of the, I guess, self-driven, discovery-driven type of gameplay, where you think you know, you feel like you know everything, but you play again and you discover something new, and that makes you want to play again after this.
Yes, that's
right?
That's like the experience that I love the most when playing some of your games, like BattleCon and Exceed. It's like when you figure out those weird strategies that nobody else thought of, and you're like, hey, but this is a really good strategy. Like in BattleCon, when you dash or dodge into someone's attack instead of dodging over them, and people are like, what the hell are you doing? And I'm like, this is the correct play. You just don't see it yet, right? Like that's the moment where it's like, oh, that's so good. That's the moment I crave.
Yeah. With that, when people are enjoying content, achieving mastery, and you are discovering as you play, you really do feel like you're getting more out of the game. You're squeezing this game. You're getting more value out of it, a lot more value. A game with good replayability could live for hundreds of hours, and whereas a game that you can only play once might only have just a few hours of gameplay, or even be like almost a movie in some senses.
Yeah, you're not wrong, right? Some games do kind of play out that way, which is why I kind of hate games like walking sims.
There's merits to it. It's a different kind of play. Like, I played Amnesia, and I loved Amnesia, and I played the second one. I loved the second one too. And they're an experience, right? And I can always go back to that experience. I don't need to play it again. I'm not worried that I missed anything or that there are secrets that are going to show up later.
Yeah.
You know, like I played Gone Home, and it's like, I don't need to play Gone Home again. There's only one story there.
Gone Home Part 2, Electric Boogaloo.
It's a good experience. It's a good experience. But if we are pursuing mastery, one playthrough should not be enough. You can't master Minecraft, right?
Yeah.
And
That's true.
And people pour, an unlimited number of hours into a game like that.
Yeah.
So if you're truly trying to create something that is, that encourages players to seek mastery, replayability is a must.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I think like that's something we take for granted sometimes, that we think replayability is just adding more stuff in, but really it's more about making smart use of the stuff that's already in there, Like like characters in BattleCon or characters in Exceed, like to make them more replayable isn't to just like give them more cards, it's to do our best with the 30 cards that they currently have and figuring out how those 30 cards work with each other, you know what I mean? So at the end of the day, it's like, smart use of the resources you have, and replayability can really like be a force multiplier, right? Or a work multiplier.
Yeah, you're leveraging the amount of content you create to get a greater output of player engagement than the work that you put in. Right?
Yeah.
I put in a little bit more work and I managed to create a much larger experience. And I think that's the goal of replayability in a lot of cases, is to make the game feel endless, or to make the game feel like it's much larger, or to make players feel like they can get much more out of it by playing that next game. Like, I discovered something in this game, let me play one more time and I'll discover something even more interesting in the next game. And it's especially good if the game's multiplayable, like a roguelike or like a competitive game.
Yeah, and for our games specifically, a lot of people tend to point towards the fact that they feel that level 99 games are, they're always worth way more bang for your buck. You know what I mean? It's like, by making a game technically infinitely replayable, people can buy a $10 experience that will last them for literally forever, right? Let's just look at Minecraft, right? Like, you spend, what, $20, $30 on Minecraft, and then you get to play a game forever, and it gives you an endless amount of entertainment. And to many people, that price point matters a lot, right? Because they deal with time to dollar ratios. I personally don't subscribe to this, right? Like, I feel like if an experience is worth my time, even if it's only 1 hour of time, I'd rather go through an experience that's 100% awesome for that 1 hour than an experience that's like 30% awesome for 60 hours, like Kingdom Hearts 3.
It's true. You don't want to dilute it. You don't want to, and I think that is a good segue into the pitfalls of replayability, because it's very easy to dilute your content in the pursuit of replayability, but you really don't want to do that. You want to leverage your content So I'm taking what I've already known and I'm building more into it, so that you can discover more. So you have a concrete experience, a good concrete experience, and then I'm putting in paths or opportunities or alternatives that will also provide a different experience that's similar yet different. I can branch that path and create something unique. So I'm not cutting my one path into 3 or 4 different paths. I'm really building 3 or 4 different paths off of my one.
Can I give an example?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so I think we're going to mention both forbidden games in this one example. So
you're already one down. So
forgive me, Brad, for I have sinned. So Dark Souls does this really well, right? They have the typical jobber skeleton enemies that are littered throughout the entire game. But Dark Souls does so much with just the 3 skeleton enemy types, right? There's 3 of them. There's the spear guy, the sword guy, and the bow guy, right? And the way they've constructed it is so amazing, because you can have the same spear guy in multiple areas in Dark Souls, but because of the environment that they put the spear guy in, the challenge becomes severely different. Because fighting the spear guy on an open, flat area is way different than fighting spear guy on a narrow bridge where you can fall on either side, right? But that's still the same spear guy.
Well, but not necessarily. Like, that spear guy has actually about 7 moves, and each instance of him knows about 3 or 4 of those moves.
That's fair.
So they you kind of learn the spear movements in such a game, but each instance of the spear knight is going to be different. And then you get to the big castle at the end, and you have the heavily armored spear knight, and he knows all 7 of the moves, and he has excellent response time with raising his shield, and the fight is suddenly much harder, and you have to actually put what you learned into practice.
Yeah, but they're all the same spear guy.
But
right?
they're all the same spear guy, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what makes it so good. On the other end, the other Forbidden game doesn't do this so well. How does Kingdom Hearts increase its replayability? It throws the same shadow at you 20 times, right?
With more hit points. Which is the worst.
That's it. It's the worst, right? But that's it, because that's what makes it, like, that's the difference between replayability and just padding the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's meaningful differences that allow you to make different strategic decisions in one, and the other one means you have to master X more, right?
Yeah. And, different games for different kinds of gamers. But it is a, it's a thing. Like, when you do put in a lot of that heavy replayability, you can really, it can be pretty daunting to new players. And this is a big thing about Dark Souls too, is that the wall that you have to climb to start to recognize, these skeleton guys actually do all have the same pattern. That can be tough. It can be galvanizing, but it can also be, a real deflection to players.
Yeah, this is something that's a problem in games like Millennium Blades too. As much as I love it, right? Like, new players tend to get so overwhelmed because there's just this giant heap of information that they have to know, or else they lose, so to speak, right? A common feedback I've heard is like, well, I don't know what the cards are. And I'm like, yeah, but that's part of the game. Discovering the cards is part of the game. But there's just a specific subset of people who are like, no, I must know all the cards before I play. And I'm not saying that that's a wrong way to try to experience games. I'm just saying that this type of game is definitely not for those kinds of people, right?
Yeah. And it seems like a common thread that we do keep coming back to here is that the game has to be right for you to make sense. So the kind of player you are is going to determine a lot about what level of replayability is right for you.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, again, episode 1. See, this is why we did episode 1, because it just ties to every single topic we talk about. At the end of the day, does the game fulfill the purpose the player needs it to fulfill, right? Because not every player is out there looking for mastery. Some people just want a quickie, get in there, play a game for 5 minutes, get out, right? And
yeah, a standalone casual experience is fine. And even a standalone solid experience. Like, some people really do like a game like Hansa Teutonica, which is pretty much going to be the same each time, or El Grande, which is pretty much the same each time. Some people like a little bit more variability in a game like Agricola, or things that have some amount of setup, Twilight Imperium, but the core engine is pretty much the same throughout most of the games. Twilight Imperium is probably a bad example. There's a lot of variety in those factions.
Yeah, there are.
So going from that scale, from like the Hansa Teutonica scale up to the Twilight Imperium scale, there are players who appreciate each different level here.
Yeah, and so I think this is one thing that we have to point out when we talk about all of these game design things, is that not doing the game design thing we're talking about isn't necessarily bad. No tool is bad. The topics we talk about are tools, and none of them are inherently bad. They're just things that you can use to cater a game experience to the specific audience that you want to cater to. And so if some people don't like replayability and that's your audience, they don't like replayability, then feel free to use these tools that we're giving you in order to reduce replayability, or at least reduce the amount of variability during gameplay, right?
Yeah, I think everybody wants replayability, but they might want it in different forms. Some people want a solid starting point where we're all on level ground and we can develop positions. Some people really want to start on different ground and adapt. Some people really want to have the game continue on in an asymmetric way, like a legacy-style game. So there's definitely a valid way to do this. I don't see really the games that have zero replayability lasting very long. And this would be a game like Time Stories, which is truly like a story game, or the Unlock escape room games. You go through the events and then you've solved the puzzle and you're done. Those kind of games really there's a good market for them, but they do exist only in one playthrough.
Yeah.
So you have to consider those experiential games as a third category with zero replayability.
Yeah, but like at the end of the day, right? Like those games aren't necessarily bad. They're just
all those games
audience.
are good. Yeah, there are good games in every single one of those categories. And so you have to decide which level is right for your game, and don't try to mix it up. Because if you do try to make a game like Detective or Time Stories or the Unlock escape room games, if you try to make that unplayable, it will either be overly complex or a bit ham-fisted, or it just won't be enough to make players want to play it again. The fact that the combination on the save changes, that's not going to affect the storyline, because this is really a game about unraveling the storyline.
Like, imagine trying to do a old school adventure game roguelike. That'd be weird. Mm-hmm. Like that's a genre that's totally zero replayability with a genre that's meant to be infinitely replayable. I mean, it might work, but it's really hard to make it work. So just know your audience.
That's kind of Monster Prom, right?
That's kind of Monster. No, not really, because that's a visual novel. Visual novels are choose your own adventure books, right?
I guess, but that's
what kind of gives them the replayability. I'm talking about like Monkey Island adventure games. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, like that. Well, if you were going to try and fuse those genres, Monster Prom wouldn't be a bad place to start.
Oh, definitely wouldn't be a bad place to start. Okay, so I think my last point I want to say here, and it's a very important point. Replayability comes with it a few pitfalls. We've already talked with some of them, but I feel like the biggest one is this. If you add a lot of replayability to your game, that also means a lot of variable setups, a lot of randomness during play, or a lot of post-game content that not everyone will get access to. That means one thing, Brad. The more replayable you make your game, it is more likely, I'm not saying it's a directional causal thing, but the more you make your game replayable, the more likely it means that the game is not catered or not handcrafted, because you have variable setups, you have randomness factors. This means that you won't get to cater the experience that the player goes through, and this could be bad in some ways.
At some point, you're putting your experience at the mercy of the players and letting or even at the random setups. And so it is possible to get that setup of Argent where I can't gain IP except from the infirmary, and that's a really it's a unique experience, but it's not a first game experience. Players won't really get the true play of the game by playing a situation like that. So it's worthwhile to really to take a balanced approach, or even to do your more procedurally generated or random replayable content or whatever at the end of the game in the post-game type of section. Make sure that you give players the full experience right up front, or the tutorial experience right up front, and then let them explore more variable setups or more variable adventures.
Yeah, so that's something that Pokemon does really well, right? And I think we're also trying to do with a game like Seventh Cross, where the game itself has some branching story paths, so on and so forth, but there is an end to the game of Seventh Cross, and the post-game content is with the morphing castle, or whatever it's called.
The challenge mode, and with fading some of the more complex monsters. And we're looking at actually doing some, I guess I would say, build your own type of content. That's still heavily in development, so I don't want to say anything particular about the post-game content except that it exists.
Yeah. That's the point. We said it on podcast before that, we want to do something like a randomly generated castle or something, right?
That was in a much earlier version of the game that we had that kind of capability. Because the game's more paragraph driven now, we've had to change that technique a little bit. So it's probably going to be more about the monster fights being more flexible than the storyline portions.
I see. So it's like how do you call this? It's like fighting the Emerald Weapon in Final Fantasy or whatever, right?
Yeah, but the castles, we have worked to make the castles a lot more replayable. So each castle you can speed run through. You can take a more complex path. There are multiple different endings. There are paths you can take that will cause some characters to turn on you. There are paths you can take that could cause different characters to turn on you. The main villain of a story might be different depending on which path you take. So there's reason to actually play the campaigns over again, and that's where we've tried to put the replayability in that game, at least as far as the storyline goes.
So the branching paths.
Yeah, into the branching paths, and it's really more of an open world type of game than a branching path game.
Oh, I'm so excited for this game. But Brad, you know what else I'm excited for?
What's that?
Not having to endlessly replay this podcast, because we need to end this podcast. Because as much as it's replayable, it's only replayable for 40-minute chunks.
All right, well, let's call this one. And Marco, it's been great. I'm your host, Brad Telton. With me, Marco DeSantos, also known as the Mechanic Critic. And together we are the Level Cap Podcast.
Oh, Henshin! Or something. I don't know. Are we a Sentai team?
I guess so, yes. We both
right.
turn into a podcast. It's kind of like Wonder Twins.
I see. So Wonder Twin powers activate form of a podcast, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay, pretty much. All right, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the New Level Cap Podcast. Please, 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 if you liked anything about this episode, share it with a friend. If you hated it, share it with an enemy. And if you have anything you want to talk about, game design or otherwise, tell us in the comment section down below, and we'll answer you as soon as we can. So, without much else to say, thank you, World of Indians. Thank you, and good night.
The New Level Cap Podcast is produced by Level 99 Games. Join us next Wednesday for more design talk and shenanigans. Thank you for listening.